It sounds like the president, at least in his words, came awfully close to withdrawing last week, although there's been conflicting reports about whether he was backed off by the leaders of Mexico and Canada or his own staff and aides. What's the answer to that?
Well, I think what people don't understand is the president encourages lively discussion within the White House and between the White House and the cabinet. In the course of those discussions, all kinds of alternatives come up. I think what's unfortunate is someone leaked one of the many potential papers that was floating around and created a whole skirmish over something that had not been decided upon by the president. So where we are is his position is he will renegotiate NAFTA. We had already notified the Congress of that some months ago, and now we're waiting on a technicality called the 90-day letter so that we can begin the process in a more formal way. Congress has to give us that authority.
Yes. What was your recommendation? To be more aggressive or to follow the tack we're currently on?
I don't think it's useful to discuss the ins and outs of private discussions with the president. I very much support the position he is taking, and I think it is the correct position going forward. Now, what he did say is that if at the end of the day we can't renegotiate the deal properly, then he'll have to think of other alternatives.
Secretary Ross, everything is being measured in the 100-day mark now that we crossed that threshold on Saturday. When it comes to trade policy, there is an argument that the president has certainly been behind on his 100-day campaign promises, not labeling China currency manipulator, not starting to renegotiate NAFTA. There have been no bilateral trade agreements as were promised. How would you rate the trade policy?
Well, first of all, the reason that we haven't had the formal negotiations on NAFTA is very simply that Congress has prevented us from doing so. So it's very hard to blame the president for something outside of his control. But what we have done in terms of trade is quite a lot of things. We've brought quite a few more trade cases than had been before. We levied $1 billion fine on Canada for dumping softwood. We levied on the export side $1.19 billion fine on ZTE, the second largest Chinese telecom company, for violating the sanctions against North Korea and Iran. And we've done a million other things in the way of other trade cases.
Fair.
We've begun self-initiating cases, not making the industry wait till it gets itself organized, but saving a lot of time by filing them ourselves. So it's really quite wrong to say there's been nothing done on trade.
That is fair. My question on that, Mr. Secretary, is how involved is Peter Navarro as the president's trade advisor? Do you guys work together on some of these enforcement actions? Is he working on bigger picture trade negotiations? Can you talk about his role?
Well, I know Peter very well from the campaign. He and I did perhaps a dozen or so editorials together on trade policy, on various other parts of the president's economic plan. Peter is on White House staff, which means he's into the policy side and into coordination between the White House and the Department of Commerce. He is not a trade negotiator. That's not his function, nor is it his desire. We have the statutory responsibilities of the U.S. Trade Representative, and then you have the collaborative role that the president has designated for me to play. So we're cooperating as a kind of a triumvirate.
Secretary Ross, Navarro specifically seems so focused on the trade deficit. Many other economists believe that that focus is ill-advised, that it is not a particularly accurate barometer of the economic health of our country.
Well, Navarro is an economist. He has his opinions, and as I say, the White House encourages diversity of opinion because that's the way you make sure that you vet all the sides of an individual question. But Peter is spending a lot of time, for example, on the Buy America, Hire America. That was one of the very explicit sections in the executive order the president issued when we were all in Harrisburg Saturday this past weekend.
Well, speaking of Buy America, Hire America, when you say that you're going to renegotiate NAFTA, which is what you said at the outset here, tell us what actually you see coming. Give us some sort of sense as to what that actually means and how long that may take.
Well, first of all, NAFTA is an ancient treaty. It's decades old. Neither our economy nor the Mexican nor the Canadian economies are remotely similar to what they were back when the deal was done. There's nothing in it really about the digital economy. There's relatively little in it about the service economy. And in the sections that it does address, some of those are also clearly obsolete. They have a section called Country of Origin, Rules of Origin, permitting components to come into NAFTA duty-free. Well, many of the parts that were described in the NAFTA agreement aren't even used in cars anymore. So it's an agreement that's sorely in need of revisitation. Its enforcement provisions are pretty weak. There are lots of issues about its dispute resolution mechanism, and it shouldn't surprise one that it needs change. Here you have several thousand-page document, decades old. The idea that they got everything right for all those years.
And there seems to be a desire on the part of the Canadians and Mexicans to move with great dispatch. I mean, is it your sense that you can actually get something done, though? And I don't even know what a timeline would be for something like that.
Well, the key to the timeline is the Mexican elections are next year, the presidential election. So the closer we get to the election, the more difficult it will be to get anything through. In that regard, they resemble the situation in the U.S. Closer you get to a presidential election, more difficult to get something through.
I know Carl's got a final question for you.
Yeah, finally, Mr. Secretary, we heard that soundbite with the president talking about the balance between addressing China on trade and trying to enlist their help in addressing North Korea. Has North Korea made it more difficult for the U.S. to be aggressive on trade? More difficult than you'd like?
Oh, I don't think so. We've actually been having some very constructive discussions on trade with the Chinese in parallel. I think what the president was trying to say was we're trying to have an overall constructive relationship with China on a variety of topics, the most pressing of which, because it directly involves human lives, is the North Korea situation. I don't think he meant to indicate at all that he intends to trade away American jobs just for help on North Korea.
Briefly, Mr. Secretary, when will we start to see those promised America First bilateral trade deals, and who's first in line?
Well, we are on notice to the Congress about NAFTA. When Vice President Pence and I were in Japan a couple of weeks ago, we also began an economic and strategic dialogue with Japan. And so we're exploring a variety of sectors in which to have those discussions. But we are not able to go forward with NAFTA until the Congress grants us the Trade Promotion Authority. And that's not in our decision-making capability. It's totally within the hands of the Congress.
Mr. Secretary, always good to talk to you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me on. I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary at the Milken Conference with Sarah and David Faber.
Yep. Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.